My wife flinched when I touched her, so I disappeared. 6 months later, she saw me with another woman and begged for the love she once threw away. My name is Daniel, I am 30, and until recently, I truly believed I had built a marriage that would last forever. From the day I first met Emily, she had been this bright, warm, and gentle presence in my life. We met at a small coffee shop on a rainy afternoon when I was 24, and she was 22. She was sitting at a corner table, reading a book with a slight smile on her face, and I remember thinking to myself that I had never seen someone who looked so peaceful. I took a deep breath, walked over, and asked if I could join her. That day sparked a connection that grew quickly into something I thought was unshakable. We got married 2 years later, surrounded by friends, family, and all the promises that come with vows spoken under the warm glow of love. For years, we shared laughter, small adventures, and the kind of quiet moments that made me feel safe in a world that often felt chaotic. Emily and I built a life together, from the tiny apartment we first rented to the cozy house we eventually bought. We would cook dinner together, watch movies late into the night, and talk about our dreams for the future, children, traveling, growing old together. I honestly thought I knew every corner of her heart. That's why, when things began to change, I found myself confused, then concerned, and finally completely broken. It started small, little moments where she seemed distracted, or when her laughter felt a bit forced. At first, I told myself everyone goes through phases. Stress from work, hormones, or just the natural ebbs and flows of life. But then, one evening, something happened that shook me in a way I couldn't ignore. I came home after a long day at work, excited to see her. She was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at her phone. I walked over, smiling, and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. In that instant, she flinched. Not just a little shift of surprise, but a sharp, almost instinctive pull away from me, like my touch burned her. The room fell silent. My hand hung in the air for a moment before I slowly pulled it back. My smile faded, and a heavy weight settled in my chest. I asked softly, "Emily, what's going on?" She looked at me for a second, then looked away, shaking her head. "I'm just tired," she said flatly. But I knew it was more than that. You don't flinch from someone you love because you're just tired. I sat down across from her, searching her face for answers, but she avoided my eyes completely. The days that followed felt like living with a stranger. She avoided physical touch whenever possible. If I tried to hold her hand while we watched TV, she would gently pull away and pretend she needed to adjust something. At night, she turned her back to me in bed, claiming she was cold and needed to wrap herself in a blanket. I tried talking to her, but she either shut down the conversation or became defensive, saying I was overthinking things. Still, my heart knew something was wrong. One evening, after another failed attempt to connect, I stood in the kitchen alone, staring at the floor. I realized that I had two choices: continue begging for affection that no longer came willingly, or walk away before I completely lost myself in the process. The decision hurt more than I can put into words, but deep down, I knew what I had to do. Ethan sat there on the edge of his bed that night, his mind a storm of questions that would not settle. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the slight flinch, the way Claire's body moved away from his touch as if it carried heat she could not bear. It was not the movement of someone who was simply tired or distracted. It was the movement of someone who felt uncomfortable, maybe even disconnected. He tried to tell himself it could have been stress from work, or maybe she was just feeling unwell. But deep down in his heart, he knew this was something deeper. For years he had tried to be her anchor, the man she could lean on, the one who never let life storms pull her under. But tonight, for the first time, he felt like a stranger in his own marriage. The next morning was no easier. Claire moved around the kitchen with a kind of quiet efficiency, pouring herself coffee and glancing at her phone between sips. Ethan sat at the table, his hands wrapped around his mug, searching for the right words to bridge the gap that had formed overnight. But every time he tried to speak, she would nod absent-mindedly or respond with short, distant sentences that left no room for connection. It was as if a wall had risen between them, one that she did not want to acknowledge. He remembered the early days when they would sit in this same kitchen laughing about silly things, talking for hours without checking the clock. Now, silence was the only language they seemed to share. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan noticed more signs that something had shifted. Claire would stay out later than usual, claiming she was catching up on projects or having dinner with colleagues. When she did come home, her eyes were often tired, and her smile felt forced, as if she was playing a role she no longer believed in. Ethan tried to push away the dark thoughts creeping into his mind, but they lingered like shadows in a room with no light. He started wondering if she was slipping away from him not just emotionally, but entirely. And with that realization came a quiet, painful truth. Sometimes love did not end with a fight or a shout, but with the cold absence of touch. When I moved into my new place, I expected peace, not drama. The apartment was small but perfect for one person, with a balcony overlooking the city lights that seemed to whisper that I had a fresh start. For months, I focused on healing, on building myself back up from the man who once believed that love could overcome anything. I went to the gym regularly, picked up reading again, and even joined a cooking class. I did these things not to impress anyone, but to reconnect with myself, the person I had neglected while trying to keep a dying marriage alive. And slowly, bit by bit, I felt lighter. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach began to fade, replaced by a calm sense of control over my life. 6 months later, life threw me a twist I could have never predicted. I was walking out of a cafe with Claire, a woman I had met in that very cooking class, when I heard a sharp gasp behind me. I turned, and there she was, Hannah, my wife, or rather my ex-wife, since the divorce papers had been finalized weeks ago. She stood there, frozen, her eyes wide as if she had just seen a ghost. Claire was chatting about the pastries we had bought, but her words faded when she noticed the tension in the air. Hannah's gaze dropped to where Claire's hand was resting casually on my arm, and I could practically see the realization hit her, that I had moved on, that I was no longer the man waiting around for her to decide whether I was worth loving. Her voice trembled when she said my name, almost like she was afraid I wouldn't turn around. I simply nodded, offering a polite smile, and said, Hannah, that was it.
No warmth, no bitterness.
Just her name. She took a step closer, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite read at first. But then it became clear, regret. Her words tumbled out in a rush, like she was afraid she would lose the chance to say them. I miss you. I made a mistake. Please, can we talk? She reached out as if to touch my hand, but I stepped back gently, not harshly, just enough to show that the space between us was no accident. I looked at her, and in that moment, I realized how much had changed. The man who once would have given anything to hear those words was gone. I said, Hannah, you don't miss me. You miss the version of me who would have done anything to make you happy, even at the cost of my own happiness. That man doesn't exist anymore. Claire stood beside me, silent but solid, and I felt a quiet strength in knowing I didn't need to raise my voice or prove anything. I had already won by walking away months ago. Hannah's face crumpled, and she whispered, Please, just one more chance. But I shook my head slowly. You had every chance, I replied. And every time, you chose to push me away. I hope you find what you're looking for, but it's not me anymore. With that, I turned and walked away with Claire, leaving Hannah standing there on the sidewalk, her hand half raised as if she could somehow pull me back. But she couldn't. Not this time. And as I walked away, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just freedom. The kind of freedom you only find after letting go of someone who never truly valued you until you were gone.